Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I'm doing another character showcase today. Xybia, the Genestealer Cult Magus, is coming to Tacticus as the first playable character for the faction. You know my format for the character showcases by now. We'll start by taking a look at the character and her kit. Then we'll examine her abilities, discuss some nuances and special scenarios, before concluding with a character infographic and where the character might do well. Everything is timestamped, so let's dive straight in. As usual, the model and animation are fantastic. Xybia has two traits. We are familiar with the Psyker trait, but are also introduced to the Ambush trait. The first time the character is defeated, she leaves behind a decoy. At the beginning of Xybia's next turn, if there is still a friendly decoy on the battlefield, she is resurrected with full health on a random friendly decoy, and she can still take a full turn afterwards. I'll show you how this plays out and answer some questions in the gameplay section. The stats on screen are at Diamond 3. I'll take a closer look to show you how this compares to other characters in the game later on. Even without my comparative analysis, it's pretty clear that Xybia is really fragile defensively. She has a base movement of 3 and a 2-hit melee and ranged psychic attack. Xybia has an active ability called Mind Control. This targets an enemy unit within 3 hexes that is adjacent to one of your friendly units. For this round and the next, that unit takes 20% bonus damage, but also suffers from reduced damage and is taunted by the adjacent unit with highest current health. Her passive ability is Spiritual Leader. After moving, she randomly places a decoy on an empty adjacent hex. Then, if there are at least 2 decoys adjacent to her, she summons a Neophyte Hybrid on one of those decoys. If the Magus doesn't move, this ability triggers at the end of her turn. The stats of the Neophyte Hybrid, which has a physical melee attack and a projectile attack, are on screen here. Again, we'll analyze this in more depth later. We can see how this all fits together in her gameplay footage. In this first clip, we see Xybia try to use her active ability. As there is no adjacent target, the game tries to move her next to Gulgort so that she can use the active. However, once we move the Tyrant Guard into position, the active ability works just fine from range. We get a debuff icon on Gulgort that shows he is mind controlled. The debuff means he does less damage, takes more damage, and is taunted for 2 turns. The damage stat on the unit card isn't changed, and we can cycle through 2 turns of combat to see the damage stat of 315 doesn't change even after the debuff falls off. In this clip, we can see that when a heal effect is applied to a unit, the taunt falls off, but the damage debuffs remain. To further illustrate, I've created another gameplay loop where Snappereka is initially mind controlled, but then repaired by Gibascraps and can move away. I have purposely downscaled the active to deal around 180 damage per hit. However, with mind control in effect, each of those hits only does 20 or 30 damage. For this clip, we can focus on Xybia's passive, Spiritual Leader. This creates these decoys whenever she moves. The decoys are steppable, which means they are destroyed when stepped on, but can also be destroyed by area of effect attacks, and I'll show you that later. The spawn locations for the decoys appear to favour valuable hexes, so things like high ground, or, when possible, being adjacent to a previous decoy. When Xybia ends her movement adjacent to at least 2 decoys, she spawns a Neophyte Hybrid. These summons can't immediately attack and have reasonably fragile stats. However, they have the Ambush trait, meaning they can respawn on another decoy once. You can see that in effect here, as Macer kills one of the hybrids, but it simply respawns on the next turn. As the clip runs through, you can see that the respawned hybrid no longer has the ambush buff, indicating that it won't respawn again if killed. In this clip, you can see Tank Smasher step onto the decoy that Xybia created and kill her from the high ground. Gibascraps spawns a tank on the newly formed decoy, and as a result, Xybia dies for good and doesn't respawn. A question you might have is what happens when the battlefield is cleared, but a few decoys remain. Does the game wait for your units to respawn, or is the battle ended? As you can see here, after Gulgorts uses his active and charges, all of our units die and the battle simply ends. Another question you might have is about Xybia's active ability. Specifically, what happens if she uses it and then dies but is resurrected? Well, in this clip you can see her use her active to taunt Tank Smasher. Snapper wrecks Xybia, and on her resurrection she is unable to use her active a second time round. I've applied some cheat codes in the test build to move Mortarion around the map and give my team 1 million health. This is just to illustrate that yes, the active ability of Xybia appears to work on guild raid bosses, at least in terms of increasing the amount of damage the boss takes. However, as the gameplay progresses, you can see that Mortarion isn't taunted to Tyrant Guard and uses his abilities as normal. More boss gameplay. Here you can see that Xybia's active reduces the boss ability damage too. In this clip you can see that how initially Rokuldorn's active ability, Gunner's Kill on Sight, one-shots the Screamers. However, after Xybia applies her active ability debuff, the Screamers survive comfortably. I want to highlight one final thing in the gameplay before we move on to analysis. Mephiston moving adjacent to Xybia destroys her decoy through his passive ability, Fury of the Ancients. This just highlights how area of effect damage can still destroy these decoys. Mephiston's passive also applies this debuff that prevents the unit from being revived. This clip just serves to highlight the distinction between revive and resurrection. Revive is conferred by abilities like Rotbone's passive and Incissus's passive, and the resurrection is a totally different mechanic. Accordingly, Xybia can resurrect despite the attentions of Mephiston. Okay, so we've talked through Xybia's kit and showcased her abilities. I've listed her stats and abilities here on screen at various thresholds for your perusal. Feel free to pause this slide and take notes or screenshots if you'd like. The character is summarized on screen here in my usual infographic style. Her numbers on the right are at Diamond 3. Tauan, Tacticus Ambassador and Friend, has run those comparatively against the existing characters. Xybia is super fragile. Her stats place her in the bottom 5th centile for health and the bottom 4th centile for armor. Her damage against high armor targets is okay, but she's not a primary damage dealer. That leads us to consider where the character is helpful or where Xybia might shine. I think the most obvious slot might be within the Psyker team. Her active ability essentially mirrors the damage bonus conferred by Roswitha's active, who sometimes finds a role within the same team. Xybia can also potentially add summons to the battlefield that increases her overall damage output over 6 turns. Her attacks are psychic, so her advantage over Roswitha is that she can help stack the Neurothrope. It will be interesting to see if the damage reduction conferred from her active ability means that she creeps into some teams over Roswitha, potentially allowing undergeared characters to survive. Roswitha still does a significant amount of damage against Psyker bosses, so the swap isn't straightforward, but it's some food for thought. Xybia is pretty fragile defensively, and I'm not sure she will be a great PvP character unless we see more from the yet-to-be-revealed characters. In Tournament Arena, she's downright terrible, as she dies so easily, respawns, and then you get another point for killing her again. As a creator and ambassador, I've only seen the Magus and Patriarch for the faction. Xybia's active ability seems to want something meaty to tank an enemy's attention, and I wonder if that means we might see the Genestealer Cult aberrants in the future to fill out the faction. I'll maybe sign off there. Thank you as usual to my Patreons who have given me the platform to continue making this content. If you are in a position to support me and my work, I'd love it if you could check it out. If not, I've left my Refer a Friend code here on screen. If you are a newer player, you can enter it and earn yourself 100 Blackstone. It is single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!